So far, we've discussed briefly what the Visual Basic programming language is. But what is this Visual Studio thing, and how does that relate to our work this term? So Visual Studio is a programmer's workbench. And a programmer's workbench, almost like a workshop, has many, many different tools in it, all laid out, as it were, metaphorically on a craftsman's workbench, where the craftsperson would have all their tools right at hand to do any of the work that they need in building a project. And moreover, a project could be many different types. So if you're working out in your garage workshop, you might be doing an electrical project, or you might be doing a plumbing project, or a craft or a woodworking project. So a workshop or a project workbench allows you to do many different kinds of projects, and that's true in Visual Studio as well. So let's take a look at that. If I say File and I tell it to open a new and choose Project, there are many, many different projects, and these will change depending on how your Visual Studio is configured. For example, I could work on projects using the Visual C++ language, and in that language there are many different types of projects that I could work on. Visual C Sharp is another one, and again, many, many, many different types of projects that I might work on, and so on. So here we're going to be working this term exclusively in the Visual Basic language. So one of the things you want to check when you get started and are creating a new project, make sure that you select Visual Basic as the project you're going to work on. And then within Visual Basic, there are several different types of templates for different projects we might get working on. And that's a lot like working on in your garage on, did you want to work on an electrical project today, or a plumbing project today, or a craft project, or woodworking, what have you. Okay, so we're going to be working exclusively in our exercises and our assignments this term in what is known as a Windows Form project. So it's going to have the GUI, the graphical user interface, GUI. However, for some of our learning and exploration that we use our Flowgorithm tool for, we may also work in the console app, the .NET Framework console app. And the console app is like the old style computing before there were GUIs and Windows and nice, Mac Snow Leopard interfaces and those kind of things, all just plain Jane text in the console app. So the reason I mention that is that when you layer in the complexity on someone learning about programming structure and programming languages, and you add all these graphical objects and object-oriented paradigm programming and other things, it tends to be a lot at once. So we can use the Flowgorithm project and some plain Jane, more straightforward code to learn using our console app motif, rather than doing everything solely in the Windows framework. But we're going to use the Windows Form app and the GUI for all the work we turn in for credit. So the console app is going to be strictly used as a learning tool to kind of unwind some of the graphical complexity. Okay. So once we have projects that we have created out there, we can also use this file open, and we can come to an existing project or solution and reopen projects we've worked on recently. So for instance, in the last example, I think Windows App 2 was our little Hello World version. We can open that back up and open the solution file. And we're back to where that was, and we can run it again. So other parts of the Visual Studio that we're going to learn and explore, we've already started learning about the program editor. And as we saw, the program editor is intelligent. So if we make a syntax error or a spelling error in a known reserved word or keyword or any variable that we've declared that is suddenly not recognized, if I say tax, we get the Intellisense and it will help to show us what we've done wrong. The other thing that's really handy here is as we start to type, Intellisense will give us a list of objects that resemble what we're typing. And so rather than having to type the entire keyword, we can select it. And then if we're talking about properties or methods, we can get code snippets and further assistance. So text box 1 is an object. What are the kinds of things that we can do with it? Well, we changed the text of it, but we could also change the size or the layout, the alignment, the length of the text, where the top corner lives, the location, the width of it, all kinds of things. So Intellisense helps us to know all of those keywords as we're learning as programmers. We may not know all of the properties and methods of an object or all of the keywords, and it can help us to more quickly find the keyword that we're looking for and to learn new keywords about how an object can be changed in terms of its properties or the things that it can do using its methods. Okay. Let's take a look at another thing we can do, and you don't have to remember all this right now. We're trying to get just an overview. So there is also something called a debugger. And the debugger is sort of like a medical x-ray machine for our code. It allows us to look within the body of the code while the code is running. So I just came over here and clicked in the gray margin to the left of this command that is going to change the text of the text box. And what I've done is set a breakpoint. So if I run this in debug mode and start it running, what will happen, I have a build error. Oh, remember I changed the spelling? It's telling me there's a syntax error there. There we go. Let's build it again. All right, so now when that click event happens, the debugger is going to run the code down to this breakpoint, and it will stop immediately before this command executes. Bam. And so it stopped in real time, and this is where we are in the code. And in the debugger, I can then look at the call stack, and I can look at the value of different variables and different events that are going on, and I could add to the watch list. So if I want to look at what is the current value of textbox1.text, it will tell me there's nothing in there. It's empty quotes, so it's empty. And now we can step through this a line at a time. So we can sort of freeze time and run through our code very slowly. And I can do that by stepping to the next. So if we look at debug, if I want to step over a piece of code, we can continue. That will continue running after the break. But if I want to run one step at a time, I can step over this line to the next line of code. So if I hit F10, or if I click here, that will do it. And notice that when I stepped over that, the code executed, and the watch window is telling me that the contents of the text box 1 text value changed to hello world exclamation mark. So very, very useful. And then we can continue the run by pressing F5. And now we have our window back, and you can see what the results of that execution were. So don't worry too much about the details of the debugger right now. The point is that our Visual Studio is a programmer's workbench. It allows development in a number of different programming languages, and it brings all together tools such as the code editor, an intelligent programs editor, a debugger. The other thing that it's doing for us, that when I press start, it's doing a build, and so it's compiling and linking the code. And so compiling is the task of taking all this human readable code, source code we call it, and it is converting it, because we said this is unambiguously equivalent or can be translated unambiguously to specific computer binary instructions for the CPU and the operating system that we're using. And so that's what the compiler does. It converts this to the equivalent machine language codes, the binary codes that tell our processor exactly what to do. And that's done for us in the compile step. And then the link step, as you might imagine, this is a very short program, like 3 lines, really all the work's being done by 1 line. But in order to make a window and make it appear and give it all the Windows controls, there's actually a lot of additional code that we didn't write that we're kind of inheriting, that creamy, golden, delicious goodness. Those are coming from the .NET Framework library. And so the compiler compiles the code we wrote, and then it hands things off to something called the linker. And we told this project that it was going to be a Windows form project. And so that template knows that there are Windows components that need to be joined in, code that's already been pre-written for us by the good folks at Microsoft or elsewhere. And or we can even write our own libraries in the future when we become really proficient programmers and link our own tools in. But nonetheless, it joins that up. The linker combines our code and adds in those missing pieces that support it, and we end up with a running Windows application, and voila, our Windows form application appears, our controls are rendered, the code executes as it should, and we also get these nice controls for minimizing, resizing, or closing the window, all for free as part of what the linker has done, bringing those pieces in for us. So that, in short, is our Visual Studio. And so again, we've so far talked about what is the programming language we're going to work with, which is Visual Basic. And a language has syntax and grammar and logic. And we've talked about the tool that we use to develop and program our Visual Basic in, and that is Visual Studio. Visual Studio is our programmer's workbench, and it provides the intelligent program editor and the debugger and the linker and the compiler, and actually several other things that we'll touch on as we go forward.